Imagine minding your own business on a Wednesday and getting absolutely steamrolled by pancake syrup with murderous intent. Boston in 1909 managed to turn breakfast into a blunt force weapon, corporate negligence into modern art, and a storage tank into the world's stickiest lawsuit. This wasn't some cute little oopsie spill, this was a 2.3 million gallon. What if we ignored every warning sign and hoped for the best, speedrunning its way through an entire neighborhood? So let's talk about Boston, January 1990, where the Purity Distilling Company, and yes, that's actually what they called themselves, owned a massive storage tank on Commercial Street in the North End. This thing held 2.3 million gallons of molasses, which is roughly 13,000 tons of thick, sticky industrial sludge meant for making rum and munitions. The tank was 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, and painted a lovely shade of brown. Not because brown was the company color, because the tank leaked constantly and brown paint hid the molasses oozing out of the seams, which is the kind of corporate decision-making that really builds trust with your neighbors. The tank had been built back in 1915, rushed into service without any proper safety testing because there was a war on and Purity needed to churn out industrial alcohol. The walls were absurdly thin for something that size, the rivets were shoddy, and the whole structure groaned and creaked loud enough that locals could hear it. People who lived nearby had complained for years. The company's response was essentially to shrug, slap on another coat of paint, and hope physics would be polite enough not to intervene. Children in the neighborhood would collect the leaking molasses in buckets, which sounds charming until you remember they were playing near a structural disaster waiting to happen. January 12, 1919. A steamship pulls up and dumps a fresh delivery of warm molasses into the tank. Warm molasses mixing with the colder molasses already sitting in there. Pressure building. The walls of this poorly constructed tank now holding an increasingly unstable cocktail of thermal expansion and corporate negligence. For 3 days, the tank sat there groaning louder, the rivets straining, and absolutely no one at Purity Distilling thought perhaps this was the moment to, drain some of it, or check if the walls were about to give up on life. Then January 15th rolled around. Lunchtime, 12:30 in the afternoon. Unseasonably warm for Boston in the middle of winter. People going about their day, laborers at the paving yard, workers at the wharf, horses pulling carts. Typical Wednesday, and then the tank just exploded. Not a little crack, not a slow failure. The entire thing ruptured in an instant, releasing all 2.3 million gallons at once in a wave somewhere between 25 and 40 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour. Molasses, moving faster than you can run. A wall of sticky brown sludge taller than a 2-story building roaring through the streets of Boston's North End like the world's worst tsunami. It demolished buildings, ripped a firehouse off its foundation, derailed an elevated train, knocked over support columns, killed horses, and I quote, like flies on sticky flypaper, which is both accurate and deeply unpleasant to picture. People didn't stand a chance. 21 people were unalived, most of them suffocated under the weight of molasses that was thick enough to trap them and heavy enough to crush. Another 150 were injured, either from the initial wave, the debris, or the sheer chaos of being caught in what is essentially a flood made of syrup traveling at highway speed. Rescuers tried to help, but the molasses was already starting to thicken in the cold air, turning from liquid to something closer to cement. Navy cadets from the USS Nantucket, which happened to be docked nearby, rushed in to help dig people out. The harbor turned brown, the streets were coated, the smell was everywhere. Cleanup took weeks. They used salt water from the harbor to try and wash it away, which helped a little, but molasses doesn't just rinse off. It gets into every crack, every crevice, every surface. For decades, literally decades on hot summer days, people in the North End would swear they could still smell molasses rising from the pavement. Some say you can smell it to this day, though that might just be the power of collective trauma and a really stubborn stain. And the company? Purity Distilling, part of U.S. Industrial Alcohol, immediately tried to blame anarchists. Just threw that out there, said maybe someone sabotaged the tank. Because obviously the more plausible explanation for a structurally unsound tank bursting under pressure was a conspiracy, not the fact that they'd ignored every warning sign and painted over the leaks like that was a reasonable long-term solution. The lawsuits started rolling in. By the 1920s, the courts ruled the company negligent, and they paid out damages, which must have been a real shock to a corporation that thought brown paint was an acceptable safety measure. The Great Molasses Flood remains one of the strangest industrial disasters in American history. Not because molasses is inherently funny, but because every single step leading up to it was a completely avoidable choice made by people who simply decided not to care. They built it badly. They ignored the problems. They hid the leaks. They overfilled it. And then 2.3 million gallons of molasses unalived, 21 people on a Wednesday afternoon because someone couldn't be bothered to do the bare minimum. The smell lingered for decades, which feels like the universe's way of making sure no one forgot. If you'd been in charge of that tank in 1915, would you have A, actually tested it before filling it with 13,000 tons of molasses? B, drained it the second you heard ominous groaning sounds? Or C, just painted it brown and hoped for the best? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay unhinged.